Welcome to the Diplowomen podcast, where we will be talking with and about incredible women mediators, facilitators, negotiators, ambassadors, peacemakers, peace builders, and more. I am Ekmekji, and I will be your host in this journey of mainstreaming the women, peace, and security agenda into our lifestyles. With a focus on the Arab region, the Diplowomen podcast comes to you in collaboration with the Issam Fares Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut, and is made possible by the generous support of UN Women. The Arabic subtitled video edition is available on the Diplowomen podcast YouTube channel. We're thinking out loud with Dr. Muneera Al Khalifa in this new episode of the Diplowomen podcast. Dr. Muneera is the executive director of Mohammed bin Mubarak Al Khalifa Academy for Diplomatic Studies. She is a graduate of Oxford University, both master's and PhD, where she was the first Bahraini woman, actually the first Bahraini, to be awarded the Clarendon Scholarship. Dr. Muneera is the highest ranking female diplomat in the Bahraini Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She is a mother of four. Dr. Muneera, it is a pleasure and an honor to have you with us on the Diplowomen podcast.
I'm very happy to be here with you, and I'm very happy to share whatever experience that I have, and very happy to start this conversation.
I'm sure this conversation is going to be inspiring to many in the Arab world, women and men, amongst the youth especially. Dr. Muneera, you initiated the Mohammed bin Mubarak Al Khalifa Academy for Diplomatic Studies. I just want to start by asking you, what triggered this idea? Why did you wake up one morning and say, this is something we need to do in Bahrain?
Well, this is a very important question. The Academy for Diplomatic Studies, what we call the MBMA, for it's easier, started off as a diplomatic institute. It started off in 2016. I had just graduated from my PhD. And getting the academic background really showed me the importance of having the opportunity in which you could, in whatever career path, develop yourself and creating these learning opportunities. Sheikh Khalid bin Ahmed Al Khalifa was the Minister of Foreign Affairs then, and he was a mentor for me. And so we had a conversation in which we both agreed that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs needed a diplomatic institute. Mm-hmm. He trusted me with establishing it and then heading it. And then His Majesty King Hamad transformed the institute into an academy in which the scope grew, the responsibilities grew. And so the idea was that, from its inception, we saw the academy develop into something that now has a very prominent role to play. So what we do briefly is we recruit diplomats. So we work very closely with young diplomats. We train them, but we also train diplomats throughout their careers, from juniors to ambassadors. So we prep diplomats from ambassadors coming in and bringing in their experiences, but also prior to their posts. It's a very vibrant place. It's an institution that runs on Bahraini youth. So the majority of our employees are in their 30s, maybe even younger. They're full of energy. They're ones who also get their voices heard because they're the ones who bring in these ideas. And we continuously try to revise how we train diplomats, because diplomats need to be, ready for the world today. And this world keeps on changing in such a fast pace.
Absolutely. We're in a world that's in flux, and we need to adapt, adjust, and accommodate as we go by. This academy is reserved currently only for Bahraini diplomats. Is that correct?
Yes. So in terms of our main programs, we cater to Bahrainis, but we also receive requests. So we've had requests from the government of Yemen, for example, because they had, very limited resources. We had requests from various different, entities, but also we have an international diplomats program where we host. It's called Diyafa. We host international diplomats from all around the world for 2 weeks. The idea behind this is that they learn about Bahrain, but they also develop their skills. This year, our theme was Asia. So we've had people come in from countries where we don't have embassies. So for example, we've had Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Laos, Myanmar. We had like a long list of countries that we know very little about as a people, and they know very little about Bahrain. So it was a very interesting opportunity for Bahraini diplomats to also engage. They sometimes agreed with one another and often disagreed with one another, which is the world of diplomacy as we know it. So this is something that we take great pride in, and on a continuous basis, we revise and we try to think of different nations that would benefit from this type of programs.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I'm sure many would be very interested to explore this international program that you offer, and of course get acquainted to Bahrain. Let me ask you this. You head a committee in your Ministry of Foreign Affairs that's called the Equal Opportunities Committee, which I understand is part of your diversity and inclusion arm. I'm not sure how many foreign ministries in our region have this at the moment. So can you tell us a little bit about this committee, what the mandate of this committee is, what kind of activities do you conduct? Are you doing any sort of peer-to-peer activities with other foreign ministries in the region?
Sure. Heading this committee has been, for me, one of my greatest responsibilities. Let me just give you a background about the creation of this Equal Opportunities Committee. These committees exist in all arms of the government. It was an idea that was launched by the Supreme Council of Women in the Kingdom of Bahrain, in which they wanted to ensure some type of monitoring mechanism. However, what they also wanted to do is create a sense of accountability in which every entity felt that they were accountable towards, creating opportunities. And they named it Equal Opportunities because they wanted to make sure that the opportunities themselves, rather than just quotas for positions, that opportunities from, the start of a woman's career was ensured. So there's a series of questions that we as a committee receive on an annual basis, and are accountable to these questions. So for example, it's in terms of pay, in terms of training opportunities, in terms of employment, in terms of women ranking at very high leadership positions. They ask for all these detailed questions. And then when we answer these questions, you realize what challenges exist. So I'll bring in my experience specifically in the field of diplomacy here. It became tricky because the numbers were not the numbers we wanted to see. Exactly. And then I said to His Excellency, the Minister, who is also a big supporter of this committee, he said, why? Why is it that women will shy away from this opportunity or that opportunity? And then we had an honest conversation. So we had a few sessions a few years ago during COVID, virtually, with women who were appointed abroad, with women who did not sign up for certain diplomatic posts, in which we asked them why.
Why?
And yeah, there were, honestly, why? And then the type of answers that came out were shocking for me, because the diplomatic code was written in the 70s. It was revised later on, but it wasn't written with women in their perspective. And this was just a virtue and a reflection of the establishment as it was. And so certain things like childcare support, childcare support only happens after, or like the type of the financial help, yes, only comes in after 3 years, for example. And so when a woman is working as a diplomat, She would be appointed to a place like London, for example, where childcare is very expensive. It would be very difficult.
I can imagine that there may have been something related to the spouse as well, no? It often comes up.
And this was, for me, when I first started, this is a funny story. I had a friend who was working on, he was heading operations. And so he would be also responsible to purchase, to produce these business cards and so on and so forth. And he called me and he said, our ambassador to Belgium then was a woman, and she wanted a business card for her and for her spouse. And so in Arabic, we always produced Safir and Haram Safir. So the ambassador and then the wife of the ambassador.
Yes.
And he said, so what do I write in English or in Arabic on the business card for the spouse? Because he had never been put in that situation. And this is another interesting observation that we saw. Many of the women who were appointed or who accepted these opportunities were either single or were near retirement age, in which their children had already grown and they're in universities abroad. And so it was a challenge for women with young children, because in Bahrain, we have a massive support system, and childcare is very easy, accessible. Financially, it's not expensive. So when these opportunities come, the woman diplomat, the female diplomat, has to think twice, because there's so much that she has to give up on. And so as part of the Equal Opportunities Unit, we're working with officials and we're working with the Civil Service Bureau to make sure that this is no longer an obstacle, whether it's in terms of compensation or whether it's in terms of the structural elements. The environment has to really harness and has to really encourage women to progress in their careers.
This is very interesting, and we've had these conversations before, bilaterally or privately, on the importance of really applying that gender lens to these codes or these operating rules and procedures that conduct our day-to-day lives in public institutions, whether it's the foreign ministry or others. Are you embarking on some sort of workshop or exercise on revisiting these codes and these procedures?
We are, and we're involving both men and women because it's very important.
Absolutely.
And we are taking all of these into account. Part of it is reviewing the codes. Part of it is reviewing the laws. Part of it is reviewing the policies and the procedures. Part of it is, some of them are quick wins. Some of them just required us to really take into account that the school year starts at this date, so the appointments have to happen at this date, just to take into account that they have a family.
Yeah, of course. These are very important points.
So these type of workshops that we conducted, what we did was we involved the women themselves. So we involved women who were appointed as diplomats, who came back, who struggled sometimes, who didn't struggle at all for whatever reason. And we had these very honest workshops in which we listened to the things that we wanted to hear, but we also, more importantly, listened to the things that we didn't want to hear. And I was blessed because the minister actually walked in virtually, entered virtually to some of them, and he heard their experiences. And this was a very empowering experience for women to, be hosted virtually and speak up and say, look, this didn't work for me. This worked for me, but I needed more help in this. I wanted more mentoring. And so based on these also observations, we're introducing a mentorship program in which high-ranking, female diplomats will mentor younger female diplomats. And then these conversations can be very honest, conversations about burnout, conversations about
mental health.
Yes, gender stereotypes, worrying about certain things in society that another woman in this field will understand and will be able to reflect on.
Well, it's very inspiring to hear about the work that you are doing. I do hope that many other institutions feel inspired as well and embark on this on this very important exercise. I heard in your voice always mentioning that there was some sort of leadership that allowed for whether the academy to form, whether for this Equal Opportunities Committee to form. I keep hearing, in the background, political will, how important political will is for these things to advance, for issues of matters of gender equality and other matters of inclusion to advance. How important is political will, and what advice do you have for others in the region to garner the support of their leaderships on similar matters?
Well, Karma, this is a very interesting question. For me personally, let me just tell you from my personal experience, I left my PhD, voluntarily entered the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is a very male-dominated environment. I think this is a general statement in terms of also other ministries of foreign affairs, but especially when it comes to the Arab world. So I had all my weapons out. I came in charged to face any type of gender discrimination. I had thought that I would fight this fight, that I had to prove myself. And I was surprised. I didn't have to fight that particular fight because there was political will, because there was a gentleman, of course, there was a gentleman at the head of that institution who saw my voice as equal, sometimes even more, equal, I don't know.
More equal than others.
Equal than others. I was heard, and I didn't feel in any sense that this was an issue for me in that particular situation. So it was, if it wasn't for that, this would be a very different environment. It would be very difficult to introduce all of these things. But at this point, I think political will has to be institutional. It cannot be based on the individual. It cannot be just something that rests with someone who was appointed in a position and understands that. It has to be in the policies, in the procedures.
It has to be embedded in the DNA, baked into the DNA of the institution.
I'll be very honest. I mean, the political will exists institutionally. We're seeing progress, and we're far more advanced than other ministries of foreign affairs. But still, sometimes you see that one person come in and make this comment, and so it's a culture. Sometimes it's also a culture in which the young women come in and ask, can I do this and can I do that? Whereas, their male counterparts don't ask these questions. So it's also education. It also goes to the household. So it's a cultural shift. But when you're talking about the institution, I think it's very important to embed it, as you said, in the DNA.
You're a mother of 4. So we spoke about childcare, we spoke about, the challenges of being a diplomat, a female diplomat. How did you navigate, or how do you still navigate these sort of sometimes, difficult situations, or how much sacrifice do you have to do to balance between? And I know this is a little bit of a cliche question that men don't get often enough. Do you balance your personal life with your professional life? But I think a lot of us do face this. I mean, do have to make choices about travel, about the projects we choose to embark on, how much time they require of us, how much opportunity cost away from the family, away from our children. How do you do this with 4 kids?
Well, honestly, for me, let me just say this. My role as a mom defines me more than anything else. I take great pride in being a mother of 4. I've always wanted a big family. I wanted 5 girls growing up. I now have a boy and 3 girls. But the joy that I get out of being with them is something that gives me the energy to keep on going. So sometimes I selfishly spend hours with them because I recharge, and it gives me the ability to say, okay, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to keep doing this because I'm doing this for a future in which they will be able to prosper. So it gave me personally, on a selfish basis, a boost. How I managed to do it, I have a very supportive husband who takes his role as a father very seriously. He also has these questions. I know more often than not, women have to face these issues, but he also faces these issues.
I'm very happy to hear that.
He works in private equity. He has a very stressful job. And so he also tries to rush back in time to make it in time for their bedtime and read them a story. And so he also tries to work around travel. He starts to think about how I can be there for them as a father. So it's a shared, for me, I wouldn't be able to do it if it wasn't shared. So one, it's a shared responsibility between both of us. And two, because I live in a community where childcare is very affordable. And my mother lives about 7 minutes away.
God bless her. God bless all mothers.
Yes, my parents are both retired, and so they very willingly help and support with my kids. So I don't think I would be able to do what I do if I didn't have a support system. And if I didn't have a partner or family who didn't see the need for me to have an actual balanced life. So I would have friends and family come in and say, go travel, don't worry about the kids, we've got them, we'll do this part. So I have also some of my female friends who say, you're making us very proud, keep on going. And this just keeps you going because you feel like people, are invested in this as well with you.
Yes. Let me ask you this. What has been so far the most challenging juncture that taught you an important lesson on how to navigate in your leadership position? Because you do hold a very high level decision-making position. So what can you share with us from this experience?
Well, let me just be honest from the beginning. Our conversation till now has been a very positive conversation. This does not mean that it's been a very fluffy, rosy process or journey. It's not easy, obviously. It's anything but easy. So from convincing my father that I was able to go abroad and study, which was not easy.
I can imagine.
I developed great negotiation skills and lobbied at a very young age. And he was upset with me. I remember, he was very close to us, but he wouldn't agree to take me to the airport, for example, wouldn't even hug me in a way that, because he was worried and upset. I was the youngest of four, and my brother managed to study abroad, and my two sisters didn't. And so for him, it was like, why would you come in 17 years old and say, I'm moving?
You're destabilizing the system. You're disrupting the system.
And it was funny because I remember him telling me very consciously, in Arabic, he said, حطي عقلك في راسك in Bahraini, which means put your brains in your head. Okay, make sure your brains are in your head. And I remember thinking, what does that mean? My brains are in my head. But, he wanted me to really think that I'm there academically and I'm there responsibly. And fast forward, when I got the scholarship from Oxford, I'd called him and I told him, I got this opportunity, but I miss home and I'm done with academic life and I want to come back and work a little bit before. And he spent an hour on the phone convincing me to stay on. And so it was just, for me, interesting to see that shift. But also, I think in terms of challenges, the challenge of balance, the challenge of giving everything to your job, and then giving everything at home, and then giving everything to yourself. And in terms of just stereotypes, sometimes it gets to you, especially when you're doing a lot. And I'll say this very comfortably. I had faced challenges in the work environment, whether it is in my institution or when I work with other institutions, less because I'm a woman and more because I'm young. And I get these comments that honestly make my blood boil, and questions about, oh, what year were you born? Oh, and this year I was already appointed in, so it makes me feel that the challenge there is to convince them that you're worthy of this position. And at the beginning, I used to say, oh, there was a prime minister who was elected at this age, and there's a minister who was younger than me elected at this place. And then I realized that, no, I don't really have to engage. My work will speak for itself. But if your audience, a big group of your audience are young people, I do say this, don't let this get to you, because this is something that exists across the board. Young people in positions, I think, is something refreshing. It gives such a boost to any institution. And that responsibility is a big responsibility on us to make sure that this doesn't stop. We need this.
Well, it definitely resonates with me, being this idea of you're young and you're a woman. So it's like a double sort of challenge that we need to always address or face until we reconcile ourselves with that and say, we're doing our best, and our best is sometimes better than what you're all doing. So, but if it's any consolation, our Arab society is a young society. I mean, more than 50%, if not more than 60% of the Arab world is under 35. So it's a youthful society. And I think that the only way for us to transform our region, for it to become more inclusive, more peaceful, more productive, is to see more and more young leadership, young leaders in the right places. I want to take this conversation back to the Diplomatic Institute and ask you about the major results or the prominent results that you have achieved in the last a few years. I mean, you said you established it in 2016. How is it growing, and what's your vision for this institute?
Well, it's been growing remarkably. Quite honestly, we started off really focusing on recruitment and making sure that we have the right person for the job. Then we introduced these programs that run throughout the year, including languages. We introduce also mandatory training hours. So we've said to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, look, you want to develop and to really meet the standards and really progress, you need to devote 70 hours a year in which you're learning. Whatever it is that you're learning, you're learning. You're learning a language, you're attending a lecture, you're attending a seminar series, you're listening to an ambassador sharing their experiences, you're learning about consular, whatever it is, yes. You're learning. And that was something that was revolutionary. It was something for us that there was some type of resistance at the beginning. But then we realized that by introducing these mandatory hours of learning, that we had a lot to do. We were able to introduce different types of programs. Now, I think where we are is we're looking at the human aspect of diplomats. And this is something that we've recently introduced, because I'm part of a diplomatic committee in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that decides on diplomatic appointments and promotions and so on. And I was working with a team at the HR in which we were looking at the career path of a diplomat. And it was 4+2 plus 4+2. Different countries have different averages. Some of them have 3+2 or 3+3. But when you look at that, you see ahead of you or in front of you the life of someone who will be uprooted so many times. So you pack up and leave, and you pack up and leave, and you pack up and leave. And when we look at how we prepare these diplomats in terms of their pre-appointment, we give them a crash course in language. We tell them a few lectures about the place. We tell them how to run the embassy, but we don't care about their well-being in terms of preparing them for transitioning, how to develop, these skills to adapt, the culture shock, the child who's just been uprooted from a school and has to make new friends. And so we've tried to humanize this process, and to look at this in a lens of these are human beings with complex emotions, and to avoid a risk of burnout, to make sure that these diplomats, who are our responsibility, fully thrive as human beings. We really need to make sure that the programs take into account the human side, the mental health side, and the family side, the spouse, the partner, the child, the teenager, the mom, the older mom who's accompanying, whatever it is, that family is also part of the story. And so my vision for this academy is to if you look at diplomatic institutes and academies, we have an identity crisis. We try to be several things at once. Some of us try to be a university in terms of being degree granting. Some of us try to be a think tank in which we publish policy papers. Much of this is not really impartial, because you represent, even if you have, this, because you represent a side, a ministry. Some of us try to be, training, development, a center. So there's so much recruiting arm. So we're an HR function. There's so much that goes into it. And what I'd learned from my experiences in meeting other diplomatic institutes and academies is that we have to be agile, and we have to be, responsive to change. And we really need to make sure that we take into account the actual need. We need to equip diplomats to allow them to prosper. And so if our research will support that, then it will support that. And what I'm trying to do is also to share our experiences regionally and internationally.
Yes, this is very important. I think you have much to share with others, especially in the region.
And we're starting to do that because we've had successes and we've made mistakes and we've learned from our mistakes. And so the idea is for us to also share our mistakes so that others don't fall in these mistakes. And really, we see the impact tangibly on diplomats. And we see it when they walk into the academy. We have a temporary floor across the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They come in happy. They come in smiling. They come in because they feel it's a safe environment for them to read, to debate, to engage with others, to share their experiences. So it's a sense also of belonging, because this is a big part of what we do. When we make sure that diplomats can engage, can honestly say, look, the consular part really killed me. I had to deal with people doing X, Y, Z. And then that type of engagement really builds this, environment in which they're sharing their experiences, they're sharing their knowledge. And so this is something that we take great pride in.
What can you tell the Arab youth? What advice do you have to the Arab youth, men and women, on achieving a more gender equal society, but also, having more parity in specifically the field of diplomacy, negotiation, mediation, peace building?
My son is 6, turning 7. And on Careers Day in school, he chose to be a diplomat, like his mother.
Cute.
And this was the first time in which I saw him seeing me as a role model rather than seeing his father as a role model. And I remember his teacher, who was also a woman, come to me and say, "Thank you so much for changing the perception of the boys, because this is where it starts."
Absolutely, it starts at that age.
And it's made me so proud. And I must say, my daughter also says that, but it made me more proud because he saw me as, successful woman that he wants to also, become successful. And he attached success to me being a woman as well. And so I think my advice would be to be role models for the younger generation. I think the change is coming in a slow way, slower than we want to see it, especially when it comes to gender. I don't believe in parachutes. I've seen parachutes happen and happen early in this region, in the Gulf and Bahrain. I believe in processes because, when you parachute someone in and you introduce quotas, it does not really ensure change the way that building a sustainable process would. And so for us to see change grow, we need the individual. We need the role of the household. We need the role of the parent. We need the role of the school. We need all of these institutions to work with one another. And for us to see change picking up speed. And I believe that change will pick up speed and will accelerate because I believe in the young people. I'll say this as well. I often feel like I'm young in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but I went to the Prime Minister's office in the Kingdom of Bahrain a couple of days ago, and I felt old. And it was such a beautiful feeling to feel. It was just like,
breath of fresh air. It was a breath of fresh air.
It was young people working together, trusted with high positions, challenging processes, being honest, reflecting in a way, bringing in fresh energy and fresh thinking. And so I don't know if my advice makes any sense, but I believe that we all have a responsibility. And I'd like people to take this responsibility very seriously. So it's less of an maybe advice and more of just asking people to actually take this responsibility.
To invest in this way of life, to invest in this way of thinking.
To look at women in their relation to others, not to look at, the women around you as, oh, she's a mother or she's a sister or she's a daughter or she's someone else's. She is in her existence, she is. And then she becomes, the relation to others. And so when you see the woman being the individual that she is, the one who's capable of inspiring her boy, the one who's capable of inspiring communities, then we could see this change accelerate at the pace that we want it to accelerate to.
Well, change will definitely pick up speed with role models like you in our Arab world. Dr. Muneera Al Khalifa, thank you for being with us on the Diplowomen podcast.
Thank you very much for the work that you do. I think it's very important. Maybe the advice that I gave also mirrors what it is that you do here with the Diplowomen podcast. So thank you. You are also a very inspirational character. Thank you very much.
Thank you.